So it might seem far-fetched, but let's see how this affects us here in Nigeria. Do remember that, of course, our mainstay is still crude. In our budget for 2025, is set the benchmark for crude for Brent, which is our own source, is at $75. So is this good for us one way or the other? There's also the threat that this might increase the price of petrol at the pump, seeing that we're running a deregulated market at this time. Well, let's hear what Senior Associate with Financial Derivatives, Dumebi Oluwale, has to say. Hi, Dumebi. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Good to have you. Good to see you. So, we should be happy because $80, $81 above our benchmark of 75 should mean more revenue for us.
Yes.
But at the background, we're also hearing that if our producers, refiners, are buying crude, because it's a global price,
yes,
if they're buying crude at a higher cost, then we should expect higher refined products, higher cost of refined products.
I mean, you're not wrong there. So you're very right in that if crude oil prices remain at this high levels that we're seeing, it's a good news for the federal government in terms of what we've benchmarked our crude oil price, what we've benchmarked our budget at, which is $75 per barrel. So what that means is that if we're able to produce more crude oil and we export a lot more at higher prices, we will generate more revenue, especially when we look at it when you convert the foreign currency earnings into naira. It means that going into the year we might see an increase in fact disbursements like we saw almost all through 2024. It means that the federal government has more revenue to actually meet some of this budget expenditure
unless for debt servicing.
I mean, exactly.
That's also another.
Yeah, that's also another thing that we're looking at, and it also somewhat means that if we're able to generate more revenue, the budget deficit as a percentage of GDP, which is currently estimated at 4%, for the 2025 budget, is slightly higher than what we should be having, which is about 3%. It means that we might see that somewhat decline, and this is based off of the assumption that all things go well, all prices remain at this. You
economists say it's all other things being equal.
Yes, holding all things constant. You know that this is the scenario, but we do know that we still have a lot of struggles with ramping up our oil production. We've seen oil production increase. I think on average last year we did about 1.4 million barrels per day, and we saw that steady increase. So if we're able to actually significantly ramp up oil production to hit what the budget estimate is, it means that we're looking at a positive thing going on in terms of revenue for the federal government. But on the flip side, like you rightly said, if oil prices are higher, it means that we might see an increase in petrol prices. But the thing to consider here is actually the source of crude oil for the local refineries that are existing here in Nigeria. We know at the end of last year we did see that the some of the modular refineries are already ramping up production. The Dangote refinery as well is also ramping up production, and to an extent even exporting to neighboring African countries. However, the expectation is that if the NNPC and if Nigeria is able to make sure that these refineries access crude oil locally, what this means is that they're able to hedge some of these higher costs of operations, and then
but they still have to pay at the global price.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that if we look at it in terms of the supply mechanism, right, when you're purchasing crude oil from the person that is producing it and selling at the global market, to an extent it somewhat reduces your cost. So while you're going to
all
pay
those insurance, transportation, logistics,
exactly, because the price in itself, the spot price of crude oil in itself, is not the only determining factor for what eventually becomes the final price or retail price of petroleum in the market. So if refineries are able to reduce all the other costs, from shipping costs to logistics costs, insurance costs, they're able to somewhat reduce that by actually sourcing their crude oil locally. What this means is that to an extent their cost of producing refined petroleum products will decline marginally, and that should somewhat, at least to an extent, keep petrol prices stable. I'm not saying it's going to fall because oil prices are higher, but what we'll likely see is stable petrol prices.
Yeah, but maybe there's so many ifs in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the world that we're working with right now. Yeah.
So to start with, even though the price of crude is going up now, we don't know how long that's going to take.
Last,
because Biden's administration is the one bringing up this new set of sanctions on Russia. Trump is coming up in less than 2 weeks. Trump is friends with Putin.
I mean, so right now, right, I think the important thing the major takeaway here is that the oil market is volatile. And that doesn't change whether under Trump or under Biden or under Putin. It doesn't change. And what we expect as economists from any developing nation that is highly vulnerable, right, to external shocks like this, that you make sure you hedge. And how do you hedge? For instance, for Nigeria, we do know that Nigeria is more sensitive to changes in in oil production than prices. So where we need to do more of the work is to increase our production, so that if oil prices are higher, we're able to generate more revenue. And we saw this happen during the COVID year. We also saw this happen in 2022. COVID year is an example of when oil prices significantly declined. But what did we see eventually? We saw the cartel coming in. We saw Saudi Arabia coming in to try to make sure that oil prices are propped up and at a certain level where all oil-producing economies are able to at least still break even. They're not all going to break even at the exact same price. But the expectation is that oil prices are at a manageable level where all oil-producing economies, all oil exporting countries are able to generate some level of substantial revenue. The other aspect of it is that when you consider when oil prices significantly increase, right, when you're producing a lot more, you're going to generate a lot more revenue. It's almost like a win-win to an extent. I don't think that oil prices are going to crash because Trump is coming into power, but what we do expect that there will be some level of decline in prices, because with his administration, we do know that there's going to be an increase in the U.S. Crude oil production, and there's also expectations that if he comes into power, we might see a level of stability, or to an extent, maybe even the Russia-Ukraine one.
He promised us he will sort that out
exactly,
even before
and
getting into office.
Exactly, and if that happens, right, what does that mean? It means
less tensions,
less geopolitical tensions.
Steady
and
supply,
all prices are going to,
and then
exactly.
Well, let's hope so. But FDC has projected that the next inflation number we expect in a couple of days would hit 35. I think that's expected. December, you always have a lot of. But I think the surprising thing is domestic commodities prices are falling now. Because
I really like the segue to that question, but primarily,
so there you have it. Domestic commodities prices are falling on low demand. People not eating anymore, right?
I mean, what we're seeing here basically, but let me start with the inflation figure. I think, like you rightly said, it's expected, and the reason why almost all research houses at this point forecast an increase in inflation is just because of the festive season effect. We saw what happened with debt in December, an increase in consumption, increase in income, and increase in spending, and we also saw prices remaining high, and that obviously had an impact on commodity prices. But right now we're seeing prices fall, and that's primarily because of low demand. So we do know that in January there's usually a lull in economic activities, and people are not demanding as much, and to an extent some people stocked up from the festive period into January. So what it means is that they're not going to the market as frequently, and so demand is also lower. Then the other thing to consider is this is also the period where businesses are stocking up as well. So to one extent, we're going to see more inventory, and that also will, somewhat keep prices at least high or even lower. Then the other thing to consider is an increase in the harvest season effect. So in Q3 entering into Q4, we do know that there's a lot of plant season and harvest season going on, and from now on, from at least in January, we would see an increase in supply of certain commodities just because we're still in that harvest season. But going into like end of February, going into March, we might see the planting season come up again, and then prices will start.
So this is the time to stock up. It's just
exactly.
Do you have the storage, preservation and all of
I mean,
that?
we're seeing very innovative, preservative measures now coming up on a subsistence level. People are now learning how to dry their tomatoes, roast their tomatoes, blend their tomatoes, even make homemade tomato paste, right? So we're seeing Nigerian consumers be more lucrative in how they are keeping their produce to ensure that at least it lasts them long. And I think another thing to mention here is the fact that we're seeing more unit demand happen now. So people are not exactly buying like 5 bags of rice, 2 bags. We're seeing more unit demand going on, and more frequent trips to like smaller markets or neighborhood markets now, because people are not able to buy.
The purchasing power is not there for bulk
demand.
Well, thank you so much, Dumi. Before that, I mean, I think at least we have a bit of good news of the reduction in prices.
Yes.
We should surely stock up at this time and see how long. But thank you so much, Senior Associate with Financial Services Company, Dumi Bioluwole. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.